Today we are diving into a fascinating panel discussion that I recorded during the International Design in Government conference held in Helsinki last year. I often host panels and share them as podcast episodes because I believe it's a great way to open up this event to a wider audience and create an audio documentation of the ideas discussed. While some time has passed since this panel, I think the topics we covered remain highly relevant. My name is Mariana Salgado. This is Diseño y Diáspora. We are going to present our panelists. Who do you want to go first? Ania.
Hi, my name is Ania Karzek. I'm the Manager of Strategy and Governance at the City of Holdfast Bay. So I look after the strategy and governance functions for a very small council in Adelaide, which gives me a bit of whiplash because I go right from strategic policy down into the minutiae of organisational policy, which is an interesting challenge. And we are a small coastal council, as I said, about 14 square kilometres, but almost 38,000 people. And we're a little bit unusual in that we get over 1 million visitors a year. So we have sustainability challenges across the triple bottom line, which I'll be happy to explore through this session.
Perfect. I told all of them that they have to present one case here, and then we are going to go to the general questions. Yes, Becky.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, my name's Becky. I work in the UK government in the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. It goes by DEFRA. The acronym, and I work in a program called the Farming and Countryside Program in a small team called the Policy Design Lab. We've been around for a year, and we are helping the program to take a really kind of collaborative approach, designing with farmers the new policies and services that need to support them through what's called the agricultural transition in the UK. Is happening a period of time since the UK left Europe up until 2028 and probably beyond. So yeah, that's my role. I'm a policy and service designer in that team.
Hi everyone, my name is Sofía Bosch Gomez. I'm a former government worker for the Mexico City government and for the federal Mexican government, but now turned academic. So now I work at Northeastern University as an assistant professor.
My name is Jett Virangkabutra. I'm Thai, from Thailand. I work as an academic. I teach and I also consult for the government. I previously was the manager for the Government Innovation Lab in Bangkok, which is now defunct. And but I still do a lot of work with the government, and we work on a lot of different projects, from like waste management to design for justice, amongst other things. And today we're here to talk about, my case will be on sustainability and waste management.
Perfect. Do you want to start?
Okay, yeah, great. So I worked on a project that was funded by a government organization called ERC, which is the Energy Regulatory Commission. They control the pricing of energy, working with the Creative Economy Agency in Bangkok. And the project was called Waste to Energy. So it's to like look at how we can collect waste and feed it to like the incineration plant to create energy. And the goal was to work with local communities around the energy plant. So we have to really work with them and actually connect and try to understand their needs. But the challenge was we were working during COVID, and you know the funding has already been granted, so we just have to charge ahead, and it was quite challenging to do that, to do user research during COVID.
So what did you do?
So we just gave them. So what we did was it was a design pro. The first thing we wanted to know was, what do they throw out? Because in Bangkok or in Thailand, there's no waste management whatsoever. You don't separate waste. The only thing you separate, what we call is, we call it economic waste, because it makes money. So basically bottles, glass, and people can relate to that much better than plastic waste. But you say economic waste, it means that, oh, we can make money from this. So they will separate that. But we went to the municipality, but we don't have the disaggregated information. So we had to do it ourselves. So we went to a local community, and what we did was we gave them weighing machines and get them to record what they throw out. So that's how we learned how much waste they throw out.
And what did you find out?
We found that 60% of waste is wet waste, because we eat a lot of curry. And that's because it has to go into the waste chamber. So every day they can take only 500 tons. I say only 500 because the district that we're at produce about 3,000 tons of waste every day.
Wow.
And that can only take 500. So what we wanted to do was separate waste and actually make sure that the wet waste doesn't go into the chambers. Like it's a massive chamber, it's bigger than this room. So that to shorten the time of incineration, because they need to dry it before they incinerate. And that was our goal. But the other thing was to actually create like a community waste collection so that they can separate all these waste and also make money from the economic waste and bring the money back into the community. Yep.
So the fact of calling that economic waste, that was a result of your research, or was something that it was before, like that you call it economic waste in order to promote that people could?
Actually, we talked to experts first
Yeah.
in the area, and then we started talking to people in the area. But it was quite challenging because in Thailand it's very hierarchical. You just don't go into someone's house and do it. You can do it, but then every community will have a village headman. You can't just go past this guy because it's almost like a lose of face. So you need to go to him first and then ask him to create like a small community meeting. And after we had the community meeting, we notice who talks a lot, who doesn't talk, and then we make a beeline for them. So that's how we do it. We can't just walk into someone's house, because if the community headman does not agree with it, they would not be involved. They would do anything to troll you. So that's how we do. We had to slowly, nicely, and kind of talk to him. But we don't.
So this is how you do the research,
Yeah,
right? On the community needs. But my question was like this: the idea of calling economical waste or economic waste, was it a result of that research?
Yes, because we talk to them and we look at and let's say how do you show us how you do it, and then we go, this makes money for us. This makes money for us. So okay, yeah,
Okay.
well, this makes sense because we can do this, or if this doesn't make money for us, we give it to someone so that they can make money. So it's about money, but we don't want to call it money waste.
But you also have a design intervention, right? So one of that was like to call it economic waste, and also you also have this spot where people would like do the distribution of waste. And
so we actually redesigned. It's a product service system. Thanks a lot. It's a product service system. So we look at the whole system of collection and also separating them and also selling them. So it's like a full service, and we want to involve the whole community to work on it. But one caveat is someone will lose out. The garbage collectors lose out because what they do is like on the way back to the landfill, they separate these things and make money from it. So we try to get them to be involved because the garbage collectors are not government. They're the contract workers. They actually don't work as a civil servant. So they're in a very precarious sort of position. Yeah. So we try to work with them. We haven't got quite there yet because there's so many government bureaucracy and corruption. Don't want to say the C word, but it is like that. But we're getting there. So that's how we approached it.
But sorry, I want to come to the moment that you tell us that you have some vehicles that you have created in order to have this. Right?
Bagel, sorry.
Like you have some bicycles?
Oh yeah. Okay, we created this small vehicle because Bangkok has a lot of what we call sois, which are like really small, narrow lanes, and actually big trucks can't get in there. So we created a small electric vehicle that can go through the sois, like these lanes, so that they can pick the garbage up. And what we wanted to do is because we didn't want people to look down on garbage collectors. So we don't call them garbage collectors. We call them waste managers. So they're like, oh, I'm a manager. So it makes them feel proud. So, and he just rides around in this like machine. We have a picture we can show. And collect them because they can go through the back streets and they don't have to touch the garbage at all. They just have to lift the tank, the bin up and pour it in. So that's what we wanted to do. We wanted to empower people. And one of the things we found was that the project was called Care for, C-A-R-E, because after we observe and spend time with people, we noticed that people really care. Like they would wrap up fish bones in paper so it makes sure that it doesn't like cut the garbage collectors, and glass, that they label it, this is glass, and actually tell them. And when the garbage truck comes and after they leave, there's a lot of like wastewater from the garbage truck. They come out and clean, their community because they're very proud. But no one enables them to actually help them to find a better way. So from our research, we found that one of the hardest things goes back to the wet waste, because where does it go? And the point was, it's very hard to separate the liquid. So we gave them a sifter. It's just like a little bucket with a net on top, so they can pour the liquid out, and then this liquid just go into the drainage, and whatever's left, what they call like left bones and whatever will go to like the food waste. So it really helped them. So one of the things we found was convenience is key. If it's convenient, they will do it. If it's not convenient, it's hard. No, I don't want to do it because I had to pour, I had to do this. So that's one of the insights we found. And the other thing was that people do care. But if you don't help them or give them something as a catalyst, they wouldn't do it. But once you give them something, this is not bad. And even if the whole community doesn't want to be involved, but once one starts, another one sees that, I want to do it as well. So they started doing it because they see other people doing it.
Thank you a lot. And that was a great case. Now we go to another case in Mexico, right?
Yes, exactly. So I wanted to talk to you about a project I worked in 2019 with the Mexico City government, with its digital innovation agency. Basically, they were facing a big challenge with individual transportation on board of public taxis. The main issue is that they wanted to minimize emissions, facilitate routes around the city. And they thought that perhaps they could even compete with some of the new private apps that were coming into the city. And so, and that we're kind of pushing and putting a lot of pressure into public taxis. It's something that happened in cities around the world, and we saw many kind of manifestations around it, right? So they brought me in to work and support with the design team into doing design research to redesign this new app, taxi app. And so at first, we decided to call the Ministry of Transportation and collaborate with them to understand the sort of data that they already had. And there, the problem got a little bit tricky because they told us, well, we don't have a complete database. Just as context, at that time, Mexico City had 140,000 public taxis. And in order to maximize revenue, taxis would run 24/7, and that meant that each taxi had from 1 to 5 drivers. Now, not all of the drivers were registered in the ministry, and not all of the taxis were registered in the ministry. 25 to 30,000 taxis from those 140 were actually called pirate taxis. So they look like a taxi, it seems like a taxi, but it's not actually a taxi. And that created conditions of insecurity, especially for women. So when we started the project, 2 weeks before we launched it and we started our research process, there were 2 very unfortunate incidents where 2 women on board of public taxis were kidnapped and murdered. And this created a lot of pressure, not only on the project, but on the purpose of the project. Suddenly, we were not talking about emissions and transportation and competing against Uber or Didi or whatever platform, but we were talking about women's lives, right? And so this really shifted the approach of the project, and we wanted to make it a secure platform for women riding public taxis. And that meant really shifting the approach of the research and developing internal protocols that had never been developed before, especially with Mexico City's security agency, kind of its central system, security system. So yes, that was just a very, I think, interesting process where we start with an aim, thinking that there's something that we need to approach and deliver, but actually it's completely different, right? The needs are sort of intertwined. You have a transportation problem linked with a security problem, but you have the gender perspective that is completely transversal to it.
So what did you do?
So what did we do? We reached out to the community. We knew that we wanted to talk to women specifically, women living in the periphery of the city that had to take a public taxi in order to get to the city center. So they didn't have a choice, right? And we actually also wanted to do some community meetings, just as Jett was talking about. And for this, we realized that we needed to talk to taxi drivers, and we could either do it through people that were already kind of in contact with the Ministry of Transportation and that trusted the Ministry of Transportation, that could become enablers of us talking to our community instead of blockers. Because taxi groups in Mexico City, at least, they are very big in political, I don't know how to say this.
Force.
Political force, exactly. They can collapse the city in 2 minutes if they wanted to, right? So, and there are a lot of votes. So in the end, we ended up kind of creating this community of taxi drivers, and we subdivided them into two main groups. The first one was what we called senior drivers that have perhaps driven a taxi for 30 years, right? And for them, the idea of manipulating an app while they were driving was terrifying, and they really did not want to do that. And then we had, on the other hand, a younger, kind of newer generation of drivers that would perhaps drive an Uber during the day and then a public taxi at night, right? So they were much more eager and open to a new technology that would enable their work, right? And for women, the women that we were working with, for them, it was security. The main insights from those workshops was, we don't trust you. Like, I don't care if you put an emergency button on your app. How do I know that when I click it, anything will happen? I do not trust you. And so for us, it became really important. Instead of doing external work, at that point, do all the necessary internal work to assure them and be hyper sure that the button would work and it would connect to the security center.
And it worked.
It worked. At the beginning, we did tests in these areas of the city that we were working with, and it would take more or less 13 minutes for a police car to stop the taxi. And towards the end of our tests, it would take from 2 to 3 minutes, which for the sprawl and massiveness of Mexico City is quite impressive. However, I should say this is something that I was discussing with a participant earlier today, is that once I finished the project, it really left a bit of a bittersweet taste for me. I was very proud of the work that we were able to do with such a small design team, internally and kind of externally facing, with the women, with the communities that we worked with. But on the other hand, I was just continuously wondering, what am I doing? I just set up a tracking device for the government to be able to track you if you're owning the app, right? If you set it up. So is this just kind of a short-term present Band-Aid to a very pressing issue? I don't want any woman to be in that situation or in that position. Or am I enabling something that in the longer term can be very, very detrimental socially? I don't know. I would love to hear their opinions, but I think that's kind of at the crux of service design and the sort of work that we do in the public sector, that we're always kind of navigating these waters between very oppressive institutions, right, and new governance schemes where we want everyone to participate and everyone to be equal. So how do we kind of jump between those two worlds continuously? Something that keeps me thinking.
Well, we'll come back to this question, I'm sure. So, Becky, do you want to tell us what you were working about?
Sure, yeah. So I think I'm kind of quite fortunate in the department and the program that I work on, that the whole mission is to essentially move well, I should say as well, it's not the UK. The farming policy is devolved among England, Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales. So I work on policies and services for England. But the aim is to transition us from kind of area-based payments to farmers and land managers, which is what we were on when we were part of Europe. So farmers or land managers would be paid an amount each year based on how much land they had, so long as they adhered to the basic regulations. We're shifting now away from that to payments that are made to farmers and landowners based on environmental outcomes that they deliver, based on actions they sign up to do, which is a really positive thing. Super complex though. And so the main kind of policy levers that DEFRA has been using is kind of replacing one set of kind of money from government with another. And so there's a whole bunch of services around that. So a lot of it online, obviously. So how do farmers make sense of those schemes and that money that's available to them now? And then how do they access it? So a lot of that stuff is online. I actually haven't been working super directly on that stuff, but there was another piece of work which is all around kind of farming advice, which is, alongside all of that stuff that appears online. What other kind of support would farmers and land managers need to make sense of this new funding that's available to them, and why we're doing all this? I think it's a super interesting space, and it's kind of a different policy lever. And I should say, I used to work in the cross-government policy lab, and some people might be familiar with their styles of government action framework, which I think I use quite a lot, and kind of policy teams can often default to like one or two policy levers. So in our case, it was also funding, like that's a policy lever we absolutely need to use. But there's all these other kind of slightly more nuanced kind of levers of styles of action that government could use, and advice kind of falls into that category. So I was working in a team that was looking at that. I actually joined after quite a big piece of discovery work, so which was great. They'd spoken to kind of upwards of between 70 and 100 different types of farmers from across England, working different types of farms, but also to different types of farming advisors that would go out and work with farmers. And they both be part of like government organisations and agencies, but also kind of private sector or charity or NGO organisations.
Would you say that this is a type of service that you are giving, like giving to farmers the advice on which type of benefits and how to navigate the benefits that the government is offering?
Yes, exactly. And I guess the complex thing is though was that service is delivered across multiple organisations, government agencies, but also acknowledging the role of charities and the private sector in that as well. And the different motivations, like every farmer will be kind of surrounded by different advisors based on kind of where they are in country and what's available to them, but also if they can and want to kind of pay for advice. And I suppose coming into that space as a designer after kind of the main research work was done, or the first round of research, a lot of my role was almost I identified that it was like communication design challenge to the rest of the program, because this space of advice.
So you research with farmers, how do they need to get this advice?
Yeah, and why, what their motivations are, but communicating that research back into the program, I think, was something that as a designer I was able to help with, because it's quite complex compared to designing the kind of more kind of transactional online services of like how do farmers access the money. This is quite complex, so multiple delivery organisations. And also I really tried to frame it around, kind of did some infographics and explain the videos where we kind of put farmer in the middle. And it's really a question of like, how can we make sure every farmer has got that kind of support around them to be able to kind of transition their business and make the changes they need and make sense of it. And we know that farmers in England anyway, most of them aren't always like the most digitally literate citizens, and also their main thing is that they want to be on the land. That's their job. So get some technology. In fact, like anyone running any business, they usually have an advisor of some sort. So much as we want to kind of reduce the amount of advice they might need and make everything really simple online, actually really understanding the motivations and the way farmers or any kind of visitor they do need that support, and actually it's really important that we try and get that kind of ecosystem of support right around them. So
Can I ask something very stupid? Because I have the feeling that if I need a lot of support and a lot of advice in order to get a benefit, there is something weird in the systems of fair benefits that is coming from so many organizations and is so complex that nobody can understand it.
Yeah, that's a really good, That is a really good question. I mean, and it's super complex, right? So you imagine what we're effectively kind of, there's hundreds of different actions that farmers can choose to do that might be relevant to their bit of land and their area of the country. So making sense of that is complex. You could argue that there are other ways to go about the whole how we do that policy.
Yeah.
And I should say as well that so we've got a range of different funding schemes in England. So there's one called the Sustainable Farming Incentive, which has got hundreds of different actions that farmers can choose, and they'll get paid to do different things. There's one called Countryside Stewardship, which is, again, different actions, but more based on restoring nature, whereas the Sustainable Farming Incentive is more around farming and still producing food, but doing that in a more environmentally friendly way. And then at the other end of the spectrum, there's a scheme called Landscape Recovery, which invites groups of farmers in a landscape to come together and kind of propose a plan to restore the landscape, and that might also involve food production, but restore the landscape for nature and for reduced flooding and things. So it's almost like there is that range of approaches. It's hugely complex. I mean, England's kind of one of the countries kind of leading this transition in how we manage our land, and I think it's just important to acknowledge that you need humans in that service delivery, and I think that was the kind of thing that we were trying to push. Working in farming advice, because there's a big push to be like, we could put all of this online and make it nice and simple and straightforward, but the reality is it's never going to be like that. And actually a lot of this stuff as well is acknowledging that we're asking farmers to make huge changes in their lifestyles and their businesses, and like they're not going to do that by going online. They need trusted people as part of that service delivery. I think it's something I'm quite passionate about as well, because I don't come from a particularly digital background. I've kind of worked in shops and coffee shops and music venues, and actually acknowledging the role of non-digital touchpoints in service delivery, particularly when we're talking about getting people to make big behaviour changes and lifestyle changes, like having humans in the mix and designing that in a positive way. And these are green jobs we're talking about, so that's kind of an important part of the service design, I think, to kind of uphold and understand it better.
Thank you a lot. Ania?
So the service that I've chosen to talk about today, you might need to squint a little bit to consider this a service, but I wanted to talk about strategic planning, particularly city planning. And the reason why I do consider that a service is because it's what I think connects the political, the administrative, and the community in terms of setting, those layers and working together to really create a future that we choose, not one that we arrive at by accident. And what that does is inform everything else that we do. Now, as a city at Holdfast Bay, we are very early on in our design journey and our design maturities. So we are very much creatures of legislation and very much driven by legislative requirements, right down to the minutiae of how we advertise our strategic planning consultation and that sort of thing. So we are, in some ways extremely constrained by that. And we are also very much working from a place of evolution where we historically haven't designed our services. They have evolved to, really respond to squeaky wheels rather than being actively designed. And we're now in a process of turning that around, designing an operating model and designing our services based on that operating model. And but it's all being driven through our strategic plan. And as I alluded to in my opening comments, we really have some quite extraordinary sustainability changes in our city. We are 14 square kilometres in a metropolitan area. So we have all the legislative requirements of much bigger councils, and they are legion. There are so many pieces of legislation that relate to us, and we have all of those responsibilities, but we have a tiny number of staff to deliver them. So what in another council might be a team of 6 or 7 people, in our council would be point something of a person's role. So we have sustainability challenges in terms of just our delivery. We also have, being a coastal council, we have the existential crises and threats that we deal with in a sustainability sense in terms of things like climate change. So being coastal, we are likely to suffer the effects of climate change early. But we also, really contribute more than our fair share, because we are highly urbanised, we are highly affluent. At one end of our city, we have some of the highest car ownership in metropolitan Adelaide. We have houses that have extraordinarily large footprints that house, one or two people. So we are also the makers and great, enormous contributors to the
So,
crisis.
is you and your group D
Yeah. So what we
the
did.
intervention?
So our intervention was to really look at long-term planning. So instead of doing the traditional thing that most other councils did within our legislative regime, we decided to, again, squint a bit, reinterpret the legislation just a fraction, and decide to take a longer-term approach. So our strategic plan is 2050 plus. And what that does is allows us, well, we can't predict a future that goes that far out. What that allows us to do is to signal, and as Becky said, we've inserted signposts for behavioural change, which is so important when we're talking about threats of this scale and threats of this magnitude. So we have, some interesting ones in there. If I can direct you to one of the particular interesting ones in the 2040s, so signalling towards the 2040s, 30% of the city's local roads are set aside for active transport and green space. So that's really signalling that what we want is a transport change in the future, and we want people to get active. We want them to use green. We want them to, to actually reclaim roads, because we don't have green space to just turn into carbon sinks or that sort of stuff. It's just not a viable option for us. But we do have a plethora of roads that we can actually repurpose for different things. Now, that's not something that we can do overnight. If we did, there'd be rioting in the streets. But what we can do is signal that there's actually some behavioural change coming, and we're going to need to change the way that we live in the future, even in our very well established, very affluent city. So that's some of the interventions. Some of the ways that we went about it in terms of socialising some of these things. We borrowed a leaf out of the book of Jamie Lerner, Dr. Jamie Lerner from Brazil, ex-mayor of the city of Curitiba. And he was a great advocate for using children, and I don't mean that that sounded really wrong, in a way of harnessing, number one, children's ability to imagine and their sense of hope and whimsy, but also mainly in terms of their ability to influence their parents. And so we actually we got in contact with schools in our city, and we asked some students to do projects with their families to talk about what a suburb of the future looks like. We also worked with our elected body on imagining future scenarios. Now, that was challenging because grown-ups don't like to use their imagination. They hate drawing. And they hate, and not everyone can conceptualize abstract and strategic things. We overcame some of those hurdles by having illustrators in the room. So we allowed the ones that were really recalcitrant to write on a piece of paper, but then the illustrators would come in and illustrate things for them. And then what we did with those pictures, just so the elected members couldn't say, well, that was a waste of an afternoon, why did you make us do that? That's what we ended up using in our libraries. And we love our library patrons, because libraries are a greatly underutilised resource for us in terms of community outreach, because rather than going to formal consultation where you get sort of the same 7 active people responding and hating on everything, libraries actually get hundreds and potentially thousands of patrons through the door that are normally probably really unengaged in everything else we're trying to talk about. But what we did was we used these pictures, and people were able to stick dots on the things they liked and things that they didn't like. Drones were a big no-no in our community. Nobody wants to see drones, but what they do want to see is greening. And so that gave our elected members the comfort that kind of the zeitgeist that they were following, because they were already quite a green elected body anyway, but it gave them confidence that their ambitions for the greening of the city were going to be well received by our community. And so we ended up with a very ambitious vision. If I may read it to you, it's protecting our heritage and beautiful coast while creating a welcoming and healthy place for all in South Australia's most sustainable city. So we've got a very, very grand sustainability vision in terms of being the most sustainable city in our state.
Perfect. Thank you a lot. So we have a little time for this part of the session in which I ask, but then it's your turn. I wanted to ask at least one question of all the ones that we have prepared. It's like, what are the key elements in successfully designing sustainable public services? So you have like short time for each of you. Becky, do you want to start?
Yeah, actually, I've written a blog on this kind of stuff recently, and I kind of think there are maybe like 3 key things. So I think probably the first one is like legislation. So having stuff kind of underpinned by something really solid can be really helpful to designers, policymakers, because you've got something that you've got to deliver on. So for us in our department in the UK, we've got like the Environment Act, and then there's also on the name of it, but we've got another piece of legislation particularly around agriculture. So that's really useful because we kind of, legally bound to deliver certain outcomes. The second thing, though, I think with stuff around sustainability and the planet, these kind of transitions that we have to make are really tricky, and they're going to involve people, like you're just saying, like changing their lifestyles and behaviours. And I think the only way to do that is by involving people in the process of designing, what that transition is going to be. And something that our program's tried really hard to do from the beginning, it had a real big emphasis on co-design. And we're now bringing other methods into the mix. So kind of, bring people along with you and allowing them to own the future. There's a really good paper actually that Demos had just brought out in the UK called Citizen White Paper that kind of really makes a case for this. So it's almost going to be impossible to kind of design these policies if we don't take people on that journey with them.
I need a little bit of some input from each of you. Yes, Sofía.
I fully agree with Becky, and I don't want to repeat. So I think I would add to that list just civil society being involved and keeping us in check, because at the end of the day, we are working within government. So just to have that continuous check is, I think, a good practice to implement and do good services.
Thank you. What would you add?
Have faith in people. I think that's very important. And I think policymakers need to understand design process. I think that's really key because they only know research and that's it. But they don't think about prototyping and testing and implementing. So they just think research, implement. So they need to kind of have well-versed in the design process. I think that's key.
Thank you. Ania?
Very similar, but the one, again, to add rather than repeat, fearless imagination. You have to be okay with people telling you that you're crazy. And frankly, I think a bit of madness helps, particularly if you're looking at root causes in complex adaptive systems at a global scale. You inherently have to be a bit mad to try and tackle that at a translated level. So,
thank you. That's a good summary, right? We have still 5 minutes, so I can ask you another question. We were thinking about the future. What do you think is the most relevant sustainability challenge you envision for public services?
I had 2. One was around public trust and social license. So picking up on Sophia's points earlier, I think, we are at constant risk with waning trust. We had a little spike in the early days of COVID and then it fell through the floor again. How do we win back that trust? And the other one was about, which is related to that, is ethical technology. And how do we use technology in a way to not be left behind and meet community expectations, but how do we also protect democracy even as we feed the beast that would consume it whole?
I'd like to add to the word technology and use the word technique, because we have a wide variety of people that we had to, access or need access. And that technology doesn't answer everything. So I would add the word technology/technique. What technique do you use to actually get them to be able to access your services? Because,
Which it kind of goes back to what Becky was describing as this more analog part of the service, right? That it's kind of designing that overlap between the analog and the new technological part of it.
Yeah, but we use the word technique. It could be anything, right?
And that kind of comes into participation as well, doesn't it? So I think that thing around trust, and I think it's going to be a huge challenge to take people with us, and we need different. Yes, there are citizens' assemblies, but there's also loads of other methods and techniques that we can mix up depending on the particular challenge or the people that we're trying to reach. Particularly vulnerable people might not feel comfortable going to a citizen assembly. So what else can we do to kind of, read that in? Yeah, and make sure we don't overlook people. And I maybe would add one more thing. There's something I've been thinking about a lot lately, because whilst I'm really interested in like the analog part of services, I do think there's obviously a space for digital stuff, particularly when it comes we've set ourselves all these targets around like achieving environmental outcomes, but how do we measure them? And I think data ecosystems and kind of data sharing and that kind of better kind of data literacy in terms of the data spectrum. So things the Open Data Institute do, and there's a new organisation called Icebreaker One, who are all about kind of data for net zero. And it's not kind of super techy. It's more around how do we kind of break the ice between the different organisations that have data that we need in order to know how we're progressing and agreeing how to share that data. And I think that's something that we are really just starting to understand in government. I think it's super important.
So we say that we are going to get questions for the audience. And I wanted to start with a question that someone left, but she left me the question. And she asked me that she would like to know, how do we criticize the government when we are not always very inclusive in the way that we work, because we might not engage people with other new visions or cosmovisions, right? And sometimes we work with, or we would like to engage more indigenous communities, for example, but still we are not making an effort to outreach certain communities. So do you have a stand around that, or have you had experiences that relate to that?
We have this constant tension, particularly in the city of City of Holdfast Bay, where we are on the traditional lands of the Kaurna people, who have been there for some 65,000 years. And we are also the location of first settlement in South Australia. So we have this proud First Nations history in our area, and there's very, very many significant sites, but it's highly urbanised, so it's now highly modified. And we have this constant tension. And one of our Kaurna elders, Geoffrey Newchurch, I'll quote from him: once you start that journey with accepting each other's truths, accepting truths of the past, then you start that journey of walking together, talking together. So, and I think that's the point, is that we actually have to invite others to the table, be really mindful of who is missing at all times, open those doors to the people who are missing, and accept that there are truths and points of view which are not ours. And I loved the session I was in previously. Netta from Sweden, from the Innovation Agency there, was talking about how to have more constructive dialogue and how to frame things in constructive ways, so that we're really trying to lift it above the points of conflict and the seeming impasses, but try and find those elevated points of being able to move forward constructively together.
So I have another question for anyone who wants to answer. My work usually relates to government officials, and they always are very easy to say that they want citizen engagement and citizen perspectives, but it's very hard, but it's been a challenge to actually make them accountable for those intentions. So what would you tackle this problem of being with someone who says they want a citizen perspective to actually go and get the citizen perspective? Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I think it's an ongoing thing. And for me, it's like the big cultural change piece which I was thinking about this morning, but we have to keep working at. But in my experience, I worked in we're currently in this policy design lab team. Previously, I was in the UK's cross-government policy lab team. And I think what those teams do quite well is kind of create space to kind of hold policymakers' hands and allow them to have a really positive first experience of doing that kind of work. Because they can have good intentions, that's the first step, but there's they don't necessarily have skills or experience to know how to do that work. There are loads of toolkits out there and training and things, but I think that kind of being able to walk alongside someone when they're doing that kind of work for the first time gives them the confidence and the kind of really rich experience to then be able to go and do it again. But I suppose that it's how do you scale that is kind of challenging. But I do think, and then, building a community around that as well. So, in my experience, so if you kind of, rather than trying to go in and say you're disrupting them with these new methods and stuff, it's like actually like, as a designer, having trust and faith in policymakers that they genuinely want to do that work, but we have to kind of make a safe space for them to be able to do that and believe in them when they can do it, if that makes sense.
What level are we talking? What level kind of civil servant are you talking? Is it higher level or mid-level?
Well, we usually work with mid-levels, but from small governments to national government.
Oh, okay. Because I know that in the Thai context, like Thais are very social. They like to go out and talk to people. So we say, okay, let's go talk to people. The whole team would just go down. Yeah. So we don't really have that problem.
Can I say something that, in my opinion, also there is a lot of designers and design work that is concentrated in gather insights from the field, and then we kind of neglect a little bit the other part, which is to make this actionable, like to analyze this in a way that could be used for policy making, that could be used for the implementation of certain policy. So there is a gap, right? Like we all want these participatory nice activities with people, but then there is a need of how to put design and to design the next step. So what do you do with this data in order to make it a little bit more easy to digest to the others that might not be so much into participatory activities?
But to go back to your question, that there was a case like that a higher level said but don't want to do it. And what we did was we asked them to join in one of these like field studies and said that, okay, we'll take lots of pictures and we'll put you in the Gazette. And they just went because like, oh, my name will be on there. Look, I'm down there talking to people. It's an Asian thing. It's about face. It's about giving them face. I don't know how it works, where you come from, but that's how we do it. And then they're happy to do it because they're like, oh, they didn't do that. But, like there's a picture of them talking to people and all that. So, but actually the real team that is doing it is there. But at least he sees it or she sees it and she's like, oh, okay, I understand. And it seemed to work. That's how we do it. We have to go around rather than like directly.
Here we have another comment. Please present yourself.
Yes, so I'm Andre. I work in Municipality of Oslo with designing new service for public participation. And this question of having a system for how to kind of treat the input from the citizens is really important. What has been the problem today, at least in Oslo, there's been 3 election cycles that try to like do big ambitions, politicians say exactly this. We want include participants, we want people, citizens included, involved. But what's happened is the practice of public participation is done sometimes by external consultant, designers, or like by some people in urban regeneration programs. There's no system around. So what we're now doing is using the Go Vocal platform used in Belgium. We've previously tried Decidim. To have like a digital platform to collect the inputs from the citizens and as a way to organize around participation. Because otherwise you end up with post-its in someone's office, and how am I supposed to know that someone asked this community about this issue 2 years ago and I'm making them sick and tired of this ongoing process of like, well, what do you want here? And then suddenly people want a colored school with actual like pink and green, and then they get gray courtyards. So there's also a lot of like, democratic issues of not delivering what is kind of the want, and that's kind of trauma that will also hinder people in participating in the future.
Any comment on that?
Can I quickly comment on that? I think that this might not sound like something we may want, but it's the development of protocols, right? It's even more bureaucracy, but it's developing those protocols that will not have you do things over and over again. And I think there's some amazing platforms like the one you just mentioned, like the Decidim, that can facilitate that for you. But going back to the analog, to kind of the face-to-face experience, sometimes we do need to post it. So how do you create those internal protocols so that that becomes part of the process and you create an infrastructure around it? Because that was exactly our problem in Mexico City. We were out there talking to many taxi drivers and many women, but then it was us with our field notes and our posting notes. And we had to create an internal protocol to process that and be able to report back and actually have an impact and not become something anecdotal only, right? Really create a robust research protocol around it.
So can I ask you then? So does that mean that you report insights to?
Yes, and because this was a very public-facing project, the reports were kind of going up to a year. And so we really needed to have something robust and in very quick turnarounds of 24 hours because our government, local government, Mexico City government was meeting every morning at 6 a.m. and they wanted progress every morning at 6 a.m. So it was very, it's 3 taxi for the design team. And I remember 4 a.m. wrapping up our report to send it out and saying, okay, I have 4 hours to sleep a little bit and then start working again. And so I think that the sustainability part of these processes has also something to do with our human capacity to keep going, right?
Interesting. Emma, you had some questions.
Yeah, I'm Emma Peri. I work for the city of Helsinki, and we have a service for advising housing companies on energy matters. And of course, it's related to climate change and reducing emissions in Helsinki. And I was wondering, especially Becky, how do you publicize these things? Do you climate brand it or do you not? How do you frame it sometimes? Because I understand this is about money, for example, for the farmers, but we often don't climate brand our message because it's about energy saving, it's about money saving. We want to give advice to housing companies. So what's your take on this?
Yeah, it's a good question. I guess it's probably that about understanding the motivations of the people who are trying to reach, isn't it? So I think that's probably something that, when it comes to the stuff I've worked on, maybe we've been understanding it as we go, and now really kind of understanding that even the maybe government ambition is around environmental and benefits, and the farmers and land managers also at the end of the day do care about that stuff, that they have to run a business as well. They can't, and so kind of getting the messaging right is like a communications challenge, isn't it? And I suppose if you're doing your research or you're involving those people in developing those communications or services, that stuff probably comes out. It sounds like your plan is already doing that.
Yeah, we have to do that.
Yeah, even though people care about that kind of existential crisis, it's not their immediate day-to-day kind of worry, is it often? So don't worry.
I have one that is kind of sometimes there are stupid questions or evident questions, but then the answers might be super good. And this is my hope here. Why is sustainability relevant in designing for public services? Yes, Ania, go for it.
I actually thought this was a really good question. And for me, one of the key reasons is that it's values in action. And it was really interesting arriving into Helsinki yesterday, and the contrast of some of the other places I've passed through on my way here. One of the first things I saw was 6 bins to sort rubbish. And this morning, in the restaurant at the hotel, there was a sign that informed me of how many grams per guest of food waste there had been in the hotel. So, that's social proof of trying to get me to think about, my actions and my choices, at the individual level, but in that macro sense of, the values clearly of Finland being that sustainability is embedded in the way that we do things here. So I think, values and actions is such a loud reason for why, public sector agencies need to show that leadership, because it actually does make a difference to people's behaviour at the other end.
Perfect. And feel free to answer all the others in this room. Yes, Sofía, you have an answer for that.
I just wanted to add that I think sustainability really needs to be at the crux of public sector, because we are facing currently and will face very big challenges. I think that's not surprising to anyone. And at the end of the day, the public sector is where our common shared everything relies, right? That's where we all sort of come together for good and for bad, intense moments and in moments where it's smooth. But that is what we have as a shared asset. And so we need to invest in those institutions to push us forward. And we saw it during the pandemic, right? Vaccination processes and protocols, access to health and ventilators, etc. They were all being pushed by the public sector, right? Even if the vaccines were coming from the private one. And even when we had the development of the vaccines, it was done with public resources, right? And research coming from public resources. So our public sector is really our shared assets, and we need to value that into using it to challenge some of our processes for the future.
But to add to that, I think important, if we're talking about environmental protection or environmental sustainability, if we ask why are we protecting the environment, actually it's not about the environment, it's about us. Because in the end, it's us, right? If we disappear tomorrow, what will happen to the world? Okay, it will go to shit for a bit. Excuse my language. But then it will be better. There's no pollution, So it's actually about protecting us. It's not about protecting the environment or not protecting the world, because the world will keep going, but we won't. So I think if we inform people that actually, but it sounds very selfish, right? By saying like, it's protecting us. But actually it is not. We think that, we love the earth, try to protect the earth for who?
But that's the point of an existential crisis, isn't it? It's about our existence.
Yeah. If we're not here, it will be much better, right?
Exactly.
It's funny, but it's true. We don't look that far. So.
And on a really practical level, I suppose, as well as the cost of not doing it, isn't it? Even though we keep banging on about this one, it's only going to get more expensive. There's not really an option to not do this, because the option is that it just gets worse and worse. So it's kind of the risk of not doing it, that's more risky, isn't it? And also government public services, a lot of them, it's just kind of government digital services always kind of started with this. They were like, there are lots, those are the kind of services that aren't optional. People happy to use them. So many people use those services. So in terms of their footprint, when it comes to sustainability or impact, it's huge just because of the volume of people that use them. So and we've started doing a thing in DEFRA, trying to kind of create a great set of greener service principles. And it is kind of quite skewed towards digital stuff, but also pushing it into the policy design space as well, and trying to kind of almost create they're a prototype, you'd share the link on GitHub, but trying to get, anyone in whatever they're doing in their job and public services to kind of think about this every stage, because everything had an impact, doesn't it? And if we don't start now, everyone trying to do what you can, then it's only going to become more of a challenge.
But the question here is how imminent is the threat? Because environmental problems, it's not imminent. It's a long-term thing. So you don't feel it. We don't care because it's not right there.
Well, we don't, because we're current.
Yeah, I know exactly. But there are other people who do care. I'm not saying that, but I live in Bangkok and I don't feel it. But lately, just a couple of months ago, it was raining really heavily, and there's a lot of landslides, and a lot of people died from it. From overforestation. We don't think about it that way until it really happens. Then now we're like, oh, we have to do something now. So how long do we wait? But, people think about us first. You're like, oh yeah.
Anyway. Sofía, you have a comment.
No, I was just going to say that I actually think that big kind of climate change challenges, we think about them kind of in this very abstract, big wave that is kind of coming. But we experience them, it's kind of the opposite, no? We experience them in very local, embodied ways. Through those experiences of seeing your city flooding, of nonstop fires and the smoke and the... So I think it's kind of this very experiential thing where we're trying to sort of make sense of it, right? But we are living it on a daily basis. And there are certain privileges that get us above those things, but there's not much more that is going to be possible, right? We live them on a daily basis. So I think it's a question of just acknowledging them and trying to push forward, see what we can do to.
But that's a good question. Push forward. Who and how do we push forward is the question, right? We want to do it, like, I ride my bike in Bangkok. It's a death, like it's really crazy, but I do it. And a few of us doing it, but we're trying to push it as well. So I think that's the most important thing, is that if no one's going to do it, I'll do it,
You have a question, right?
Yeah. So you were kind of, I felt that there was assumption that this was, the sustainability question was about the climate, but I don't think necessarily it is about that. And the government kind of also, deals with land management, and, there's others, aspects of sustainability, or like Mexico City is the water, and it's, there's so many things. So I think when we talk about these things, we shouldn't assume that everyone was talking about the climate sustainability, which is the most abstract and often at times quantified and, engineered and measured. But as you were kind of touching up on the embodied part of this, is how do we kind of leverage that the government has a mission and should have to kind of sustain whatever they covered, and to kind of help to bridge the part of being in a place or an environment, and the people, how to connect them to those things. And I did maybe those connecting them to things things they actually relate to in their everyday. It's easier if you're talking about participation than reaching some kind of climate goal sometime in 2050 when we will solve everything.
What would be the last comments on our last question today? Ania.
I think that's a very, very valid observation, because you're right, sustainability is not singularly around climate change. We also, in our city, grapple with social sustainability and also financial sustainability, both as a council and as a city, as an organisation and as a city. So it is a triple bottom line. It's a hackneyed phrase these days, but it's still, going back to those first principles of it. It does impact, and sustainability is a complex adaptive system too. So, it is about, well, what lever are you pulling for what outcome? And ultimately the question is, do we want the status quo when you look at that sort of possible, plausible futures kind of scenario? Do we want the status quo, or do we want something better? And what does something better look like? And it's about, for me, it's about trying to capture that imagination, or trying to, elicit the imagination out of our community to say, don't, when we're asking you about the future, don't just hold on to, I don't want you to take my car away. Don't hold on to, I don't, we need to be better prepared for storms, or we need to shore up the coastline against storm surges. What's a better future look like? And again, trying to elevate that conversation past the, the kind of almost inevitable to let's just change it up. Let's imagine something different. And to Jett's earlier point, if not us, then who? And if not now, then when?
We thank you from the designers for environment and us for being here. It was great conversation. As always, the music of this podcast is by Antonio Zimmerman. Sound design is by Julian Pereira. This podcast is published with Creative Commons license with attributions. This was Diseño y Diáspora. You can follow us on our social media channels in YouTube, Instagram, or Blue Sky, or visit our website. Remember to recommend us and recommend our books. By the way, did you notice that we published our second book on health and design? All our publications are online and for free from our website. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you in the next episode.